Hello, everyone, and welcome to Truth Army Interviews. This is where we go and discuss multiple different topics ranging from religion to politics to the culture wars, and we have on amazing guests. And our first one is a congressional candidate running for the 24th district in New York, Mario Fratto. Mario, thanks for coming on.
Joe, thanks so much for having me. It's exciting to be part of this. I'm really looking forward to chatting with you and helping get this message out there.
Absolutely. I'm personally honored because just recently you were on Timcast. So, going to Timcast and then Truth Army. So thank you so much for your time. I could write up a whole monologue and talk about who you are and what you're doing, but why do that when we have you right here? Could you speak to everybody on, this congressional race? What made you jump into it? Just a quick elevator pitch.
Yeah, basically, I started a YouTube channel putting out my political views, and I started to get censored pretty quickly. And then my channel basically got shadow banned. And I was thinking about how to get my message out there, what I could do. And I started entertaining the thought of maybe running for office because that would give me a platform to get my ideas out there. And my wife got pregnant. And for me at that moment, it was our first child. And I felt like I couldn't sit back and watch the world turn into this, knowing that my son or daughter was going to have to live in this world and explain to them someday that I didn't really do anything to change it because I was just too busy or I had too much stuff going on, or God forbid to tell them, well, your mother was pregnant, so it was a tough time, and try to make an excuse. So I said, I'm going to go out there and give this my best shot. And we did it back in 2022. We came really close in a three-way race. We're doing it again now, and I believe we're going to win this time.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, I definitely can commiserate with you there as a father myself, and looking at the way civilization is going in our culture and our country. I look at my little one and I have to just say I have to put everything out there in my own little way, whether that be with Truth Army or being a local activist and door knocking for politicians who are running, who have strong values like yourself, which I would do, of course, if I was up in New York. But yeah, I absolutely agree with that. You mentioned a YouTube channel. So you had a YouTube channel before you started running, putting your hat in the race for a congressional run?
Yeah, I did. And I'm one of those people that always needs to be doing something. And during the initial lockdowns that we had back in March of 2020, I think it only took me less than 2 weeks. I think it was March 27th. I started a Facebook page that was political. And I don't know if any of you that are on Facebook and talk politics, it usually doesn't end well. So I had a lot of people that I went to school with, or people, I known my whole life, arguing on Facebook. And I said, I'm going to make a whole separate page just with my views on there. If people like it, they can follow the page and like it. And if not, they can go somewhere else, but at least it's not my personal Facebook. And then I decided, well, I might as well start making videos, not just posting memes, but actually really getting out there. So a couple days later, I took it to YouTube as well. And within 6 months, we had over 10,000 subscribers on YouTube, which it's really hard to build a following on YouTube because somebody's got to see it and they need to recommend it. There's this whole algorithm. And we got up to over like 17,000 people had subscribed to our channel. And then they started taking away subs. The channel still exists now. It's down to like 11,000. And people kept saying, hey, we don't get notifications anymore. We every time you upload a video, it doesn't tell us. I've subscribed 4 times and I always find that I'm unsubscribed. And then we went from getting 3, 4, 5,000 views a video down to 300 to 500 with more subs than we had before. So it just got to a point I realized that they basically killed the channel, and it wasn't going to be fruitful from that point. So that was it. And I just kind of that they really ended the channel January 6th, 2021, because at that point they stepped up their algorithms because they considered conservatives to be dangerous, or whatever it was. And the channel from there just was all downhill. So
Oh, yeah. Well, there's this silver lining that COVID brought, because it brought a lot of bad. And of course, we'll be talking about that too. But it brought a lot more people to the online forum for independent news and commentary instead of the traditional, they didn't just look at the box in their living room. They became almost, there was this growth of like citizen journalists. But on the other side of the coin, thus came the shadow ban. And Yeah, it's a tough one to overcome. I mean, even to make it topical with what's happening today on X, which this interview is being released, and we love X. It is definitely the most free speech platform that we have when you compare all big social media accounts. But there's still some questions, like the Donald Trump mugshot. For whatever reason, its like count just won't grow. People will see that their photos unliked and things like that. But yeah, it's just one of those things that we have to battle. And there's this massive Goliath in front of us that sometimes seems really intimidating. But that necessitates people who are within running for public office that want to affect those changes. And because the opponents, the incumbents, tend to be much more establishment, which makes me want to ask you, who is Claudia Tenney? Can you speak to your opponent? You're out here on Timcast. I've never even heard of her.
Yeah, so it's really a fascinating thing that took place. So back in 2022, when I was running against like 7 or 8 people in a Republican primary for New York 24. I was running against Chris Jacobs at the time, and I was the only person out of those 7 or 8 people that ended up making the ballot. So I had Chris Jacobs and myself heads up for the Republican nomination in the primary, and then New York State changed the maps. And it was a 4-3 decision in the New York State Court of Appeals that said you have to go back and redraw these maps. So the maps changed, but really not that much. Jacobs didn't want to run against me because I survived all these other people. I got down to the end with him, and I was telling everybody I truly believed he was a Republican in name only, calling him a RINO. He was rated as the 187th worst Republican out of 208 in the House for being conservative, very close to the bottom. So at the time, Claudia Tenney was the sitting congresswoman in New York 22. She then she got elected with like a 100 vote recount back in 2020. So she tried to find a more favorable district. So she was running in New York 23 at the time. So she switched from 22 to 23. Well, when the maps changed a little bit, Chris Jacobs jumped out of the race and switched with Claudia Tenney. So she went from 23 to 24. So within a matter of 3 months, she was in New York 22, then New York 23, and then finally to New York 24. I didn't know anything about her really at the time. To your point, I never had really heard of her other than I remember she was the last member to get sworn in 2020 because she was in a 100 vote recount, which was bizarre because President Trump had won that district by 30,000 votes and 12 points. So usually candidates would have a hard time, you know, if Trump would have a harder time than the candidate, and that people could outperform him because for whatever reason, a lot of people would say, well, I just can't vote for him because of whatever personal reason they had. But in this case, it was her. So I figured she really needed some help. And that's why she was moving around because she was now unelectable in her own district. Um, so she calls me, late night phone call, basically telling me she's going to run in New York 24 after the maps come out. And it was my cue to get out of the way. And I didn't do that. And the great part about it was um, the next day we were saying, well, how do we got all this stuff we printed on Chris Jacobs and we've done all this research on all of his votes. And we said, well, let's look up Claudia Tenney because again, to your point, we've never really heard much about her. We look it up and she's taken all the same votes that Jacobs did. In fact, he was ranked 187th. She was 186. So they were almost the identical
Wow.
candidate. Yeah, it was incredible. So I just said, hey, switch the face on the cards from his to hers, and we'll use the same literature with the same vote. So it was really an easy shift. The only problem for us was that we had already spent half our time and money running one race. Now we had 90 days and half the money to run against another opponent. And to give you an idea of who she is as a candidate, she was one of only 24 Republicans that voted for taxpayer funded sex change operations in the military. That was back in 2017 in her first term. Totally unnecessary. We had the House, we had the Senate, and we had the presidency. 24 Republicans broke ranks with the party, voted with the Democrats, and because of 5 votes, that passed to not block them. So we're still paying for those operations. That to me is just egregious. There's no excuse. It was a single issue vote. It was an amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act in July of 2017. So it was just an up or down vote. It wasn't, oh, well, we needed to because we got something for it, which to me, there's nothing that's an acceptable trade off to do it. But she did. Um, then you go to another vote. She's voted for over $1 billion to Planned Parenthood. Um, and we all know Planned Parenthood's the largest abortion provider in the United States. Her defense of that vote, she'll say, well, there's the Hyde Amendment, so money can't go for abortions, federal funds. Well, if you're paying to keep the lights on at Planned Parenthood and paying everybody's salary and paying for all the supplies in the office, then naturally they have more time, money, and resources to perform abortions. Um, so it's shocking. I said it's like saying you don't support drugs, but you pay the mortgage for a crack dealer to so he can run the drug house. And but here, you're not buying the drugs. So it's really absurd to support that. And when she voted for that, one of those omnibus, Jim Jordan said, "This is by far the worst bill I've ever seen in my entire time in the House." And then she proceeded to vote for it. She voted with only 30 Republicans. She was one of 30 in 2021 to vote for amnesty for about 2 million illegal aliens, with AOC and Pelosi and the whole group against the majority, which, again, no explanation for that kind of stuff. She even says, well, I explain every vote on my website. Conveniently, if you go to March of 2021, there's no explanation for that vote because there isn't one. So many of these votes. I mean, I could just go on and on. She even sponsored a bill called the Fairness for All Act, where this bill will amend the U.S. Constitution, which said the first sentence to insert the term gender identity between race and national origin or whatever, the protected groups that you cannot discriminate against, which naturally would mean you can't tell somebody because of their race or religion which bathroom they can use, which sports teams they're allowed to play on. So you wouldn't be allowed to discriminate against somebody who's transgender, and that would allow men and women's sports, men and women's bathrooms, something that she co-sponsored with 21 Republicans. And I think Breitbart put out an article, 21 Republicans waved the pink and blue flag. It's like, you can't make this stuff up. And then she runs as a conservative. And since she's been our representative, since our race, it's more of the same. Every major vote that's mattered, she's voted with the Democrats. She voted for funding for illegal aliens once they get in the country, and then says we can't incentivize illegal immigration. So this is somebody who says one thing, does another, and it's not just in the Republican Party. We know the Democrats are doing it, but my problem is with the Republicans, because if I don't run, if I don't hold her accountable, and the voters don't hold her accountable, we know the Democrats aren't going to bring this up. They can't run on the same things they're doing. So the only person who can do it is somebody who's willing to primary an incumbent Republican. And we need more of this, not less. We can't fall for the talks about, well, we got to stay united and, we need to stick together. We need to do that when we're voting. But if you're not going to do that, if you're not going to vote with where the majority of Republicans are that you're representing, then you have no business running for office, let alone being in office. So I'm going to try to change that. And I think we deserve it.
Oh, God bless you. Just to make it super easy and super clear, nail in the coffin on this part of the discussion, all of those votes that you mentioned Claudia Tenney would voted yes for or endorsed, would you have voted the same way?
Not on one. Not on one. And look, I'm not gonna say that there's not something that she has voted for, because apparently it's a coin flip and 50% of the time she will vote with the Republicans. So I'd probably take those votes. The problem is when it's tails and not heads. And that's just too dangerous. So no, I do not support any of those positions. And she's called me real far right for not supporting those. The Ukraine issue was a great example. When we were first running, it was right in February, March of 2022. At the same time, she was going on TV and saying, we need to defend Ukraine. We need to send. She voted for 53 billion. And when I said I was against it, she went on the news and said, well, I'm an isolationist.
I think Mario doesn't really understand what America First means. I think he thinks it's isolationism.
And I'm really far right. Mario's just really far right. He doesn't know what America First is. And apparently in her mind, America First is sending our money to other countries.
Oh yeah, and at least as today's recording of this interview, I just saw an article this morning. Just in, Ukraine officials say $40 million that were intended for arms have been stolen by corrupt officials within Ukraine. It's American taxpayer dollars hard at work.
And imagine where that money could go here and what it could do to help people. We got veterans that are homeless on the street. We got senior citizens that are getting an average of $1,400 a month on Social Security. And the second these refugees get over here, they get $2,500 a month. And even that, she supports that. I mean, she says, I completely support anybody that comes here as a refugee.
I completely support anyone that comes here as a refugee.
It's just incredible.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. You're laying out this case of just insanity. Why do Republicans choose to still vote for somebody like this?
That's an excellent question. And I liken it to that, people got to hear the message. So she goes on TV and says one thing and people think they're getting that and they vote for that and they don't do their homework because there's so much going on in the world. This stuff gets buried. The news cycle, this isn't exciting for them. And especially when the mainstream media is so left wing, they're not going to report on things that make us sick, quite frankly, like some of these votes. But it's also a factor of what I like to say is if you're the best singer in the world, but you only sing in the shower, you will not get a record deal. Somebody's got to listen to you. And in these cases, these incumbents are funded by these, corporate PACs like Pfizer and Google and Verizon and BlackRock and, you name it, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs. More than half of the money that she raises comes from these corporations. And somebody like myself has to put in your own money and then raise money from people. And it's hard to compete. And that's why I think term limits are so important, because that's what it makes people focus on the race again. What happens is you vote for somebody once, like people do with somebody like her, and they say, oh yeah, she's a conservative. I hear on Fox News all the time. I've been voting for her for the last 2 elections. They get entrenched and embedded in these districts, and then they get privileges that we don't have. For example, for us to send out a piece of mail, it's thousands and thousands of dollars just for one mailer. But she can use taxpayer money with what they call the franking privilege, and she can send it to every voter in the district, not just the Republicans, the Democrats, independents, and that would be more money than our whole campaign. But because she's in office, she can do that, and it's not considered campaign money. It's considered voter communication with her constituents. So they've designed this system that we basically can't get rid of them. And I think we have a unique opportunity in this race to do that because we've built up by running the last time. So the normal advantages that an incumbent has, she has fewer of, as far as more people know who we are than they did the first time. We're able to raise more money than we did the first time. And we're able to focus our attention on what she's been doing in office, where that never happens. So if you had term limits, I think you would have these people that would say, okay, there's 2 new people running, or there's a Republican primary with 5 people. I better really look into what's the difference between all these candidates. But when it's something like this, they say, well, I guess I've heard of her because she's in. I don't know who this guy is. I'll vote for her. And unless we can reach those voters, and that's another issue that, she signed a term limits pledge. I signed the term limits pledge. We both, it's very simple, you have to have a witness, and it says, I will support no longer than 3 terms in the House and 2 terms in the Senate, which is essentially 6 years in the House, and you're done. She signed the pledge, refused to sponsor the bill. The organization who puts out the pledge called her out. They even put up a billboard in the district saying she broke her pledge. She introduced her own term limits bill for 6 terms, so 12 years. You can leave for 2 years and then come back for another 12, and on and on. So you can essentially do at least 48 years in the House and Senate. And she said, and when she got called out by them, she said the voters are uneducated and don't understand politics, and blamed the voters. And then went on to say, well, I like my bill more than the one I pledged to support. And she's still sponsoring this other bill in direct contrast to the bill she's promised to support. And nobody co-sponsored it. The other one's got 105 co-sponsors. She's alone on this, basically what I call the career politician bill. Um, and nobody else is with her. And it just goes to show you she'll never leave. That's somebody who will switch districts 3 times, move 100 miles, move 100 miles again, and then introduce a bill into the House that allows you to stay in D.C. for at least 48 years. It's absurd, and I think this time the voters are going to see through it.
So, Mario, you mentioned something that I think is really important, and that's just spreading the message. And you are gaining a lot of publicity. You were on Tim Pool's podcast, Timcast IRL, not too long ago. You're getting the message out there. You're having a great discussion. When you bring these concerns to light regarding her voting record, Claudia's voting record, do you think that she's feeling a little intimidated with you in the primary running against her?
Yeah, I absolutely do. I think she does feel threatened by us running this race. Last time when we ran, she put out a poll a month out from the election, 3 weeks out from the election night, and she said that we were at 6% in the polls. Well, on election night, we got over 40% in a three-way race. If the other guy wasn't in, it was basically a coin flip race. We probably would have been able to pull it off. Like I said, a little more time, a little more money, but it was a very tight race, a couple thousand votes. On election night, I called her to congratulate her, and she lost it. She was threatening me. She said that if I run again, that she wasn't going to. She ran a clean, honest campaign according to her last time, and do a nice campaign, but she wouldn't do that this time. She made all sorts of threats that what she would do that I'm not even gonna share here, because it was actually shocking to hear a sitting congresswoman talk to somebody like that. I was expecting the call to be like, "Hey, kid, nice job, good luck. You got a good future or something." And to hear somebody talk to you like that and threaten you, she kind of sealed the deal that I would run again that night. I just wanted to step away, but I'm standing there with my wife and my parents and my grandparents, everybody around, and they kind of felt bad for me, that thinking that this was going to be a kind of a special moment where you have this call with an elected official, and they tell you it was your first campaign, and you should be proud of what you did. And instead, I felt like I needed to get right back out there and fight and make sure that these kind of people will never be in office again. And I can only imagine how she's feeling now, seeing that message is resonating with people, and they're starting to agree with us that she doesn't have a place in there. If you're going to personally attack people, she's attacked my grandfather, she's attacked me, she's attacked my family, our business. I mean, you name it, she's done it. And I refuse to run that kind of campaign, but this is what they feel they need to do to win. And, you don't attack people like that unless you think they're a threat. I've kept this campaign to her record. This is how she voted. This is how I will vote. But once you got to resort to calling people names and attacking their family and friends, it's just it's beyond what should be taking place. And I think the voters are really sick of it.
No, sure, yeah, it can certainly be at the very least unbecoming of an elected official. And I think there's another aspect that you mentioned earlier. You commented Pfizer, and when running up against individuals with that much corporate support and funding behind it, I don't know how much Pfizer specifically put into her campaign or if they did it all, but just speaking abstractly, there are politicians who have corporate money behind them in some way, shape, or form. And when they see a opponent in that race who are slamming them, not about their stances, they get concerned, of course, because they want to maintain their power and control as corporations. So let me ask you this question, Mario. The COVID situation, what's your take on on the medical freedom, the vaccine mandates that came through, which are now no longer have emergency use authorization, and some, or at least at some point over this past summer of 2023, became illegal to administer because they lost that EUA. What's your take on all that?
I do not think you can any longer call the shots vaccines. This is a clear example of a false advertising. You basically duped and committed a fraud on the population. Not only that, but it wasn't just monetary. People have died. People have permanent disabilities now. People are not functioning the way they were before. And this was something that was rushed, and it was done in the name of the almighty dollar. And we can't allow that to happen anymore. And my opponent in this race is complicit in that. If you go back, you can see, I just saw somebody shared one of her tweets today where she said, the vaccine is, get it as soon as you can. It's going to be available at Walmart and it's safe and effective. She's telling people this. I know she's a lawyer, but I don't think she's a doctor.
Classic talking points.
Yeah, safe and effective, safe and effective. Well, we know it wasn't safe and we know it wasn't effective. That's why they've changed the definition 3 times of what a vaccine is. This is just basically an experimental shot that, quite frankly, didn't work. It caused a lot of harm. And I refuse to take any money from Big Pharma. I've pledged to do that. And I've also, Mary Talley Bowman is a doctor who's on Twitter. You guys can look her up. She has a pledge that you can take, which I have, that says I will not take any corporate PAC money from pharmaceutical companies. Not only that, but I'm going to call for the shots to be removed from the market. They need to be pulled. There's a lot of elected officials that are refusing to do this. You have more candidates that are willing to step up, but not enough. And I think it has to happen because we have no idea the long-term effects. Just off what we've seen now, it's terrifying. But to think what's going to be down the road, it's even worse. And I think we need people like my opponents voted for that vaccine database, that they could track people in a database who's been vaccinated, who hasn't, and what they want to do with it. Voted for a spending bill that didn't bring the troops back and kept in place those vaccine mandates. There's no way I'm going to vote for a bill that was doing that to our armed forces. So, and it's really egregious stuff that they did with this. And I think people are finally waking up. And another huge problem is the pharmaceutical advertising. We're one of only 2 countries in the world. I think New Zealand is the only other one where pharmaceutical companies can directly advertise, promote drugs to the consumer. That's totally unnecessary. And what ends up happening is these news organizations, every channel, they get so much funding from the advertising dollars from these pharmaceutical companies that their hands are tied on what they're willing to say on air. So that fake news permeates society where you hear safe and effective over and over. And the last thing they're going to do is say, hey, a lot of people just died from this so-called vaccine over here. And we really need to look into this because Pfizer's never going to advertise with them again. And you just saw Pfizer's the sponsor of the Super Bowl this year. I mean, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, Mario, we have only a few minutes left, so I just have 2 more questions for you, and I'll let them rip quick.
Sure.
It's clear that Big Pharma has a huge stranglehold on the American culture or American life. What would you do to combat that?
Well, the first thing I would do is I would only vote for candidates who refuse to accept money from pharmaceutical companies. That's a first step because we don't want people in there who are funded by them. Then the next thing I would do is make it illegal for pharmaceutical companies to advertise online. I'm a small government guy. I'm a real conservative, but this is one of the only cases where I feel like the government has the power to protect the people. And by allowing them to sell us out to these pharmaceutical companies, they're not doing that. So we need legislation on that to say that they have to stay off the airwaves with these drugs. And we need better, quite frankly, better controls. There's a lot of drugs they're selling to us in this country that are made in other countries that they won't use on their own people, but they're selling to us. That Ozempic was a perfect example. The doctor was talking about that on Tucker Carlson, and he said that it's made in Europe. It's the largest pharmaceutical company in Europe. I think it's Novartis. They won't use it for weight loss in Europe, but here it's approved for weight loss, and it's destroying people. So we need to put an end to all this stuff. We need to care about our own people and keep these people's pockets empty when it comes to selling out Americans.
No, absolutely. Mario, I'm so thankful for your time. But before we let you go, let's roll out the red carpet. Where can people follow you? What are you up to next? The floor is yours.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter or X. I'm on X at Mario Fratto. I'm on Facebook at Mario Fratto for Congress. And most importantly, our website is marioforcongress.com. You can go there to volunteer and donate. Every little bit helps. This is a campaign that is purely funded for the people and by the people. And I truly believe we can win if everybody steps up. So whatever you can do, if you want to get a real conservative, get rid of a rhino and get rid of these career politicians and replace them with a political outsider who's going to fight, then I'm your guy. So please go to the website, check us out, marioforcongress.com, and reach us on X or Facebook.
Awesome. Mario, thank you again so much for your time. It's really appreciated.
Thank you, Joe. Thanks a lot.